nation will endure as it has endured.
Our long national nightmare is over.
Give me a break. That's a bunch of malarkey.
Time to take off for Planet America. Hello, I'm John Barron.
And I'm Chaz Ciadello.
This week, two stories you asked for. First, the battle over rental evictions in the middle of a pandemic.
And second, the controversial police tactic targeting future criminals in Florida.
Also this week, Trump wants to make a comeback in 2024. Only one president has ever done that. We'll meet Grover Cleveland later in the show.
And calls are growing for New York's Andrew Cuomo to quit over those groping claims. But first,
new cases of COVID infections were up by more than 50% in the United States this week, and President Biden wasn't mincing his words, saying the situation is going to get worse before it gets better. And he had a pretty blunt warning.
If you're unvaccinated, you are much more likely to, 1, get COVID-19, 2, get hospitalized, and 3, die if you get it. This is a tragedy. People are dying and will die who don't have to die.
Those comments came as a new poll from the Kaiser Family Foundation revealed most unvaccinated Americans believe incorrectly that the coronavirus vaccine poses greater health risks than the disease. Unvaccinated adults were also much less worried about the more transmissible Delta variant, and the majority of unvaccinated adults also said they thought the news media had generally exaggerated the seriousness of the pandemic. And that is a big worry for the White House and for the Centers for Disease Control, who fear that things are only going to get worse. An internal CDC slide presentation leaked this week, and it revealed some of their thinking around the new guidance for vaccinated people to wear masks indoors in public settings. Firstly, it says the Delta variant appears to cause more severe illness than earlier variants and spreads as easily as chickenpox. And it says, as a result, officials need to acknowledge the war has changed. The CDC also cautions that as more people who have been vaccinated contract the Delta strain, scepticism about vaccines will increase, and the public may be convinced that vaccines no longer work, which is further compounding the problem, Chaz.
Yeah, there are a few issues here though. First of all, we should explain what has the CDC actually worried. There's a town called Provincetown in Massachusetts. Now, we don't know exactly how many people there were fully vaccinated, but in Massachusetts, it was 69%. So probably a lot of them. Yet, in a 2-week period from just before the 4th of July weekend to just after, this town went from 0 cases per 100,000 people to 177 cases per 100,000 people per day. And about 3/4 of those infections were contracted by fully vaccinated people. 274 of those 346 vaccinated sick people had symptoms. 5 people in total were hospitalized. 4 of them fully vaccinated. Now, no one died, thankfully, but that is a lot of vaccinated people getting sick, and that is what worried the CDC. But to be honest, I'm not sure I agree with them. Look, there were over 900 cases in the outbreak as a whole, but there were only 7 people hospitalized, and no one died. If the outbreak had followed pre-vaccine rates, there would have been 90 people hospitalized and 9 people dying. So given it's hospitalizations and deaths that vaccines are supposed to reduce, kind of sounds like success to me there. You wouldn't have known that from the media coverage though. The New York Times led on social media with claims that the Delta variant may be spread by vaccinated people as easily as the unvaccinated, which is almost certainly super misleading. Because as the article from that tweet says, while vaccinated people may spread the virus just as easily when they have the virus, they almost certainly don't have the virus nearly as frequently as the unvaccinated do. Let's put some numbers on that. In one study, fully vaccinated people caught COVID 0.048 times for every 1,000 person days. But unvaccinated people caught COVID 0.43 times for every 1,000 person days. There's like 10 times difference there. Hence, the vaccine was found to be 89% more effective than not taking a vaccine. Even the CDC acknowledged this in their slides. Look at this. Vaccines led to an 8-fold reduction in cases, a 25-fold reduction in hospitalisations, and a 25-fold reduction in deaths. And this there is from the same slides as the CDC's supposedly bad news. The CDC also found that people infected with Delta carry a lot of virus in their nose and throat, whether they're vaccinated or not. Now that may well be true, because vaccines are injected into your muscle and the antibodies they produce stay in your bloodstream, so they won't necessarily block an infection from gathering harmlessly in your nose, which is where the Delta variant flourishes. But that doesn't mean they're just as infectious as unvaccinated people, and even if they were, another study found that while vaccinated and unvaccinated people had similar viral loads in their nose and throat at the very beginning of their infections, vaccinated people, this is the yellow line, saw their viral loads dropping far more rapidly and so were potentially infectious for a much shorter period of time. Look, I understand that this stuff is complicated. It's easy to scare people unnecessarily, especially when the head of the CDC herself seems to me to be frankly struggling. This is her trying to explain that vaccines are usually about 90% effective.
For every 20 vaccinated people, 1 or 2 of them could get a breakthrough infection.
90% effective does not mean that there's a 10% chance you'll get it, which is what she implied in that clip. It means 90% less chance than if you're not vaccinated. Remember that study from before? It found your actual chance was 0.048 for every 1,000 days. That's a lot less than 10% chance. It's no wonder, John, that people are freaking out about this fairly underwhelming study when the CDC is even botching their communication. Vaccines are doing their job. Believe it.
Just very hard to communicate science right now, it seems, particularly with some mixed messages. On the upside, though, this week, the United States finally hit President Biden's ambitious target of 70% of American adults having received at least 1 dose of a COVID-19 vaccination about a month later than the original July 4th Independence Day goal. White House COVID data chief Cyrus Shapar tweeting, 468,000 doses administered, 320,000 newly vaccinated versus 257,000 last Monday. So those are people getting their first shot on that day. Sounds pretty good. But remember what Cyrus was tweeting back in late March this year? A new daily record, 3.38 million doses reported administered. 7-day average now 2.62 million a day. Well, for a lot of reasons, the steam has well and truly gone out of the US vaccination drive, Chaz. And even though Delta is driving up those vaccination rates again and people are coming back from their summer vacations through July, some more people are getting tested as well, it's a pretty big problem.
It really is, and there's a simple illustration of why this is a problem. These are the new cases per capita in high vaccination counties. These are the new cases per capita in low vaccination counties. See the difference? Okay, I know cases don't matter. How about deaths? These are deaths per capita in high vaccination counties, and these are deaths per capita in low vaccination counties. And of the 20 states with the highest number of hospitalisations, not a single one of that 20 has vaccinated 50% of its population. That's why the slowdown in vaccination is a problem. But let's look at the numbers in general. Daily cases are now approaching 100,000 a day, which is getting up there, but more concerning are the hospitalisations. They're now over 40,000 nationally, and where hospitalisations go, deaths soon follow. Right now, deaths have only just passed 400 a day. That's still comparatively low, but they are looking increasingly concerning to me. By the way, given that vaccinated people aren't getting tested at the moment when they don't have any symptoms, some people estimate that the real case rate could be much higher.
I wouldn't be surprised if on the whole we're infecting up to 1 million people a day right now, and we're just picking up maybe a tenth of that or less than a tenth of that.
Maybe not. What we do know, though, is that Florida is definitely in strife. Florida has seen a pandemic record for new cases. It's got 6% of America's population and 21% of America's new COVID cases. Deaths aren't as out of control, but they're on their way up as well. Most concerningly, though, Florida has seen record hospitalisations now as well, with 13% of hospitals reporting a shortage of medical medical personnel, up from 4% last week. Another concerning development, the Delta strain is making more Florida kids sick. Florida has 12 times as many kids infected per capita as Massachusetts does, and 10 times as many as Louisiana does. We're talking about 1,500 Florida kids being infected per day. 32 of those kids are in hospital per day, the highest rate in the country. Remember when kids were supposed to be immune to the pandemic? Well, they're not anymore.
Well, meanwhile, in New York, Chaz, the mayor there, Bill de Blasio, has unveiled what he's calling the Key to New York City Pass. And all customers and workers at any indoor dining, fitness or entertainment venue are going to need one of these passes.
This is going to be a requirement. The only way to patronize these establishments indoors will be if you're vaccinated, at least one dose. The same for folks in terms of work. They'll need at least one dose.
And Big Bill de B says the requirement will motivate more New Yorkers to get vaccinated, just as he says it did with city workers who now have vaccine mandates. Although the details are still pretty sketchy. The final pass requirements won't come out for another couple of weeks. There's a bunch of consultation to do first, and then it's going to be another month beyond that before this is even enforced.
Not everyone's going to agree with this. I understand that. But for so many people, this is going to be the life-saving act that we're putting a mandate in place. It's going to guarantee a much higher level of vaccination in this city, and that is the key to protecting people and the key to our recovery.
That's New York. Meanwhile, across the river in New Jersey, they do things a little bit differently. Here's how Governor Phil Murphy dealt with a few anti-vaxxers yesterday.
These folks back there have lost their mind. You've lost your minds. You are the ultimate knuckleheads, and because of what you are saying and standing for, people are losing their life. People are losing their life, and you have to know that. Look in the mirror.
Although, to be fair, Chaz, in New Jersey, knucklehead is a term of endearment.
Yes. Look, as far as the New York vaccine mandate goes, I'm not sure it's a massive deal in itself. All you need to do is show a paper CDC vaccine card, which you can print out from the internet if you'd like. Don't give any hints there. But the main thing this does, though, is it helps acclimatise Americans to the idea of vaccine passports, because these are slowly becoming a thing. All these rather big companies you see there have already placed vaccine requirements on their employees. The more this kind of thing exists, the more it spreads. In fact, according to YouGov, Americans already support indoor bars and restaurants requiring proof of vaccination to enter, by 59% to 32%. Axios found 70% supporting vaccine requirements for airplanes, 61% supporting vaccine requirements for schools, 66% supporting them for colleges, and a surprising 64% supporting government-imposed vaccine requirements on everyone. That includes 45% of Republicans supporting that, and a majority in all but 3 states, Wyoming, North Dakota, and South Dakota. Look, I'm not sure I actually believe that poll, John. 45% Republicans supporting general mandate.
Sounds a lot.
Yeah, but I do believe the trend. It's real, and that's why things like the New York mandate could have an effect.
Yeah, indeed. Here's a related story for you as well. Millions of American renters who were facing eviction this week have received at least a temporary reprieve. A freeze on rental evictions expired last weekend after the White House refused to extend a CDC moratorium, which has been in virtual effect since March last year. The Biden administration called on Congress to legislate after the Supreme Court ruled last month on a case that convinced the White House that probably this CDC ban was illegal. But attempts then by progressive Democrats led by Senator Elizabeth Warren, who's been at this for well over a year already, to try and pass an anti-evictions bill failed. Moderate Democrats didn't get on board with this progressive Democrat bill, and members of Congress then headed off on their August recess. But not all of them. Democratic Representative Cori Bush of Missouri, who has experienced homelessness herself, slept out on the steps of the Capitol building itself to try and raise awareness of this issue.
I'm dirty, I'm sticky, I'm sweaty, I still have on what I had on last night. This is how people will have to live if we don't do something. 7 million people, 6 million, 11 million, how many ever it is, they deserve their human dignity, and they deserve for the people that are paid to represent them to show up and do the work to make sure that they have their basic needs met today.
Well, it might have done the trick because there was an outcry and the White House ultimately stepped in against their own legal advice to extend this moratorium until October. And the relief on the steps of the Capitol was palpable.
I'm so happy for all of us.
Should be noted, though, that this is a narrower, more targeted measures. It really does focus in on the areas worst hit by COVID, but given that close to $50 billion has been allocated for rental relief and only a tiny proportion of that has been spent so far, this does give renters and their supporters some hope that they may have bought a little bit of extra time to stop millions of them being tossed out onto the streets. That's the hope.
There's the hope. I'm not sure why they would have that hope, to be honest, John, because those allocations you described were made in December and March. $47 billion in all, of which $3 billion has found its way to people who need it since December and March. I'm not sure what will change in the next few weeks before the Supreme Court inevitably strikes this moratorium down. And I say inevitably because the Supreme Court was pretty clear about where they stood. Brett Kavanaugh was the deciding vote. He only let the eviction moratorium stand because it was about to expire otherwise. He said, in my view, clear and specific congressional authorization via new legislation would be necessary for the CDC to extend the moratorium past July 31. Now, some have argued this is a different eviction moratorium because this one only applies to the worst affected regions of America, not all of America. But that definition of worst, kind of loose, John. The new moratorium actually covers 90% of America's population. So I don't think Sherlock Holmes will be required to spot the connection between the two. And it's a shame because a lot of people are relying on Congress to do their job here and get money to the renters. The Aspen Institute last year estimated 29 million people were at risk of eviction. Let's not forget the landlords who need that money as well. About 41% of all rental units are owned by individual investors. So that could well be the main source of income that those landlords have been deprived of for the last 18 months. Something is going wrong here with the money pipe, John. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's wrong.
I can't believe the system is not working in the United States, Chaz. But while the focus has been on Washington, D.C., much of this battle is actually being fought at a very local level by organisations like Jesse Tree. It's a not-for-profit based in Idaho working to prevent homelessness, so it's a big cause for them. Their executive director is Idaho Democratic State Senator Ali Rabi, and she joins us from Boise. Senator, welcome to Planet America.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk with you guys.
So can you explain for us, Senator, why, when this is apparently a $20 billion problem, that's how much in rental arrears is being held over the heads of these people facing eviction, Congress has allocated $47 billion to fix that $20 billion problem. Only $3 billion has already been paid out in rental assistance. So what is going wrong?
There are a lot of barriers to accessing the funding, especially for vulnerable and low-income tenants. One of the biggest barriers is that some states or agencies are requiring that tenants demonstrate that their housing crisis is COVID-related, which at this point can be really difficult, especially in our area where a lot of people are being evicted due to rent increases. There are a lot of documentation requirements as well, and access requirements that people are having a really difficult time to get the money. But
Senator Rabi, some of that money was appropriated over 6 months ago. Who needs to do what to make that money move faster?
I think the federal government could remove some requirements, such as the COVID requirement, and then there are a lot of best practices coming out about cities or states who are doing a really good job at distributing the funding. Silicon Valley in California is doing a really great job through a partnership with 70 different nonprofits that they're working with to distribute the funding through nonprofits who are already working on the ground. We know that the city of San Antonio just distributed their first round of funding 100%, also by partnering with a lot of different agencies and systems that were already in place. So best practices are out there. It's just kind of hard because a lot of agencies are having to act really quickly and probably understaffed to do so.
Senator, what sympathy do you have for the landlords in all of this? 40% of them are so-called mom and dad landlords, a lot of them dependent on an investment property, maybe for their retirement income. And they're getting absolutely nowhere and often getting absolutely no money right now.
It's true. It's really difficult for a lot of really small landlords right now, especially in states where the eviction moratorium is being enforced and where this rental assistance money isn't getting out. Really, really challenging. Some states, though, are not enforcing the moratorium. And so it's not as much of a problem for people that are at the point of, potentially foreclosure. But yeah, mom and pop landlords are struggling the most. Keep in mind, though, a lot of rental properties in the United States are owned by big companies who are investor run, and the bottom line might not be as much of a challenge for them.
Is 2 more months of moratorium enough time to solve the problem that exists? And is $45 billion enough money if it does get to the people who need it?
If we can get the money out, I do think at least for our local area, the funding that we have in place is enough to address the problem, at least for the next year. And then the moratorium being in place for 2 additional months, I'm not sure. Like you said, it's already been 6 months and we're struggling to get this money out. I don't know that 2 more months is going to solve the problem unless additional requirements are removed or localities, cities, states, and agencies take a different approach to getting this money out that is more community oriented and based. But I do worry that we have a really significant housing crisis underneath all of this. Keep in mind, there are already 500,000 people living outside in the United States and hundreds of thousands of people being evicted every single year in our country. And that is a problem that existed before COVID, before this money was available, before the moratorium was issued. And that's a problem that's not going to just go away at the end of all of this.
Why have people struggled so much to pay rents during the pandemic, given the literally trillions of dollars that Congress has been pumping into the community to support their incomes?
So the cost of housing in the United States is really skyrocketing, especially in urban centers as more and more people move to cities and out of more rural areas. In our area here, just as an example, we've had one of the highest rent increases in the entire United States over the last year. Rent has increased 39% in 1 year. And at the same time, wages are staying the same. And minimum wage federally here is $7.25 an hour. To make ends meet, you would have to work about 90 hours a week just to even pay your rent here at that wage. So wages aren't keeping up with the rising cost of living. And that's really the root of the problem here.
Senator, it does sound from what you're saying that even when the moratorium is over, the pandemic is over, when it comes to issues around housing affordability in the United States, you've got bigger picture problems all tied up with the question of the minimum wage, broader social justice issues. It sounds like there's a very long fight ahead.
It's going to be a long road for us. We have a really, really serious housing crisis here. The fact that, again, hundreds of thousands of people are currently living outside in our country. And at the same time, about 40% of people in most communities are living paycheck to paycheck and can't come up with even $400 in an emergency. So it's a really serious issue that is not going to be addressed just in the next 2 months.
Senator Ali Rabi, good to have you with us on Planet America.
Yes, thank you for having me. Really nice speaking with you guys.
$1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure bill has formally been taken up by the United States Senate this week, all 2,702 pages of it.
This $1 trillion bill is the most expensive transportation bill in history.
Although lead Republican negotiator Rob Portman is much happier calling it a $550 billion bill because that's just the new spending as opposed to existing spending that was set to expire. And Republicans do tend to start feeling a little bit faint when you talk in the trillions. Earlier today, the Congressional Budget Office did put a final price tag on this package of about $250 billion added to the budget deficit over the next decade. As for Rob Portman, he's trying to juggle the internal Republican politics of this by trying to give some credit to former President Donald Trump.
Every president in modern times has tried to do this, as you know, including Donald Trump, who had a $1.5 trillion package. Ours is $550 billion, so it's not quite as ambitious as his was, but he deserves credit for stirring up the debate on the Republican side and getting people to think about the importance of infrastructure. And my hope is we can get this done on a bipartisan basis.
Even if that bipartisan basis means pretending this isn't a massive win for Joe Biden and that Donald Trump isn't against it, simply because his signature won't be at the bottom of the bill. As for what is in the bill right now, there are more amendments being debated as we speak, but here's what we know is in right now. Amtrak is a big winner, $66 billion going into railway maintenance. There's $73 billion to modernise the nation's electricity grid, $7.5 billion for clean buses and ferries, that's clean fuel rather than seats. The same amount will be spent on charging stations for electric vehicles, $15 billion to replace lead water pipes, although that's only a third of what President Biden was asking for out of Congress and a quarter of what experts say is actually needed. And there's a bit of special projects being earmarked, some highway reconstruction money for Alaska, thanks to Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski, and Joe Manchin got some money earmarked for the Appalachian Regional Commission, whose co-chair just happens to be one Gail Manchin, his wife. Another crucial supporter of this bill, Republican Susan Collins of Maine, says the votes will be there to pass this bill in the next few days, and she still appears rather delighted, perhaps a little surprised that it's all coming together.
This legislation represents the most significant investment in our infrastructure since the construction of the interstate highway system,
which was back in the 1950s under Eisenhower. Still, there could be a few road bumps ahead, including a cheeky Republican effort yesterday to try and get border wall funding slipped into this bill.
And also a sickly Republican, Lindsey Graham, who has COVID, and he'll be in quarantine for 10 days. He seemed to be intending to vote for the infrastructure bill, so is it going to be 61 votes? Will Lindsey Graham make a difference?
It was always going to be Lindsey to mess this thing up, wasn't it? Meanwhile, an investigation into those sexual harassment claims against New York Governor Andrew Cuomo has come to some damning conclusions this week.
The independent investigation has concluded that Governor Andrew Cuomo sexually harassed multiple women and in doing so violated federal and state law.
And there's pressure coming from on high after waiting for this inquiry to be complete before making a judgment. President Biden has joined the chorus of those senior Democrats who want Cuomo to step down.
Are you now calling on him to resign?
Yes.
And if he doesn't resign, do you believe he should be impeached and removed from office?
Let's take one thing at a time here. I think he should resign. I understand that the state legislature may decide to impeach. I don't know that for a fact. I've not read all that data.
We don't really need to see the data because New York Democrats are pushing ahead with the impeachment process, and the legal pressure on Cuomo is mounting as well now.
Tonight, across New York, 4 separate district attorneys now launching criminal probes into Governor Andrew Cuomo after a scathing state investigation found he sexually harassed 11 women and turned his office into a cauldron of fear and abuse.
Well, for now, Cuomo is standing firm and he continues to deny the most criminal of the allegations and rejecting any call to resign.
I never touched anyone inappropriately or made inappropriate sexual advances. I am 63 years old. I've lived my entire adult life in public view. That is just not who I am.
But investigator Ann Clark says that in reality, this is who he is and has been for a long time.
We find that the governor on many occasions engaged in sex-based harassing conduct and conversations. The most serious was the governor's unwelcome physical contact with women, including touching intimate body parts.
Governor Cuomo, who has previously said that he'll stand for a fourth term next year, says the investigation is politically motivated. And it is true that Attorney General Letitia James is seen as a potential gubernatorial rival. But let's not forget, Chaz, it was Cuomo himself who ordered this investigation that he's now saying is a witch hunt.
I'm definitely not forgetting that. And Cuomo can't say it wasn't thorough either. We're talking 179 witnesses spoken to, 74,000 pieces of documentation considered, 70 subpoenas placed. It was pretty involved. And I should say those allegations weren't just about sexual harassment either. They were also about retaliating against accusers.
Within hours of Ms. Boylan's December 13th, 2020 tweet alleging sexual harassment, key members of the governor's inner circle had obtained confidential memos, ones that were stamped attorney-client privileged. They were primarily about an interaction between Ms. Boylan and an assistant. They then redacted the names of individuals other than Ms. Boylan and started sending the memos to reporters.
Of course, Cuomo doesn't consider any of these allegations proven. In fact, he made a point of that in his response video.
Trial by newspaper or biased reviews are not the way to find the facts in this matter. I welcome the opportunity for a full and fair review before a judge and a jury.
But I found it interesting that he described his investigation as a biased review, given 6 months ago he described it very differently.
I ask the people of this state to wait for the facts from the Attorney General's report before forming an opinion. And the Attorney General is doing that review. I will fully cooperate with it, and then you will have the facts.
See, back then we all had to reserve judgment and wait for the investigation so we could get the facts. But now we have to wait for a court case so we can get the facts. It's almost like he's postponing accountability any way he can. Another Cuomo defence that I took a personal interest in was his explanation for the times that he made unwelcome contact with women.
It is meant to convey warmth, nothing more. Indeed, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of photos of me using the exact same gesture. I do it with everyone, black and white, young and old, straight and LGBTQ, powerful people, friends, strangers, people who I meet on the street.
You know, my family's Italian as well. I also kiss and hug people a lot when welcoming them, but never once did I welcome someone by groping their butt or by putting my hand up their blouse and cupping their breast, like Cuomo is accused of. But maybe he comes from a different part of Italy. Look, he has a few other defences here, but I really think they can all best be replied to with this tweet from highly respected feminist Andrew Cuomo. There should be a zero tolerance policy when it comes to sexual harassment, and it must send a clear message that this behaviour is not tolerated. Hear, hear, Andrew. Where to from here, though, John? Because you mentioned potential criminal prosecution.
Yep.
Cuomo seems to have already ruled out resigning, but the Speaker of the New York Assembly has very firmly put impeachment on the table, saying the government has lost the confidence of the Assembly Democratic majority and he can no longer remain in office. He also said they would look to conclude our impeachment investigation as quickly as possible. Apparently, they've already got the numbers, so not a subtle hint there. And the polls are looking pretty bleak for Cuomo as well. A Marist poll from the day of the press conference found 59% of New Yorkers, including 52% of Democrats, saying that Cuomo should resign. 59% say if he doesn't resign, he should be impeached. Then, if he somehow gets through all that, only 11% say Cuomo deserves to be re-elected. And that only includes 18% of Democrats, as well as 8% nonpartisans and 5% of Republicans. Not sure who those Republicans are. So what's his game plan then, John? Let's take this up at the fireside, shall we?
Let us do that very shortly indeed. But first, you might remember it was about 20 years ago the film Minority Report came out. It imagined a police division of future crimes where murderers and robbers could be stopped before they could even offend. Well, In Tampa, Florida, that science fiction has become a reality. They're calling it the Prolific Offender Program, and the Pasco Sheriff's Office has been sending terribly polite letters to individuals that they think are at risk of future offending. The letter says in part that recipients have been selected based on recent criminal behaviour using an unbiased, evidence-based risk assessment designed to identify prolific offenders in our community. But the good news is, if they refrain from criminal activity over the next 2 years, your prolific offender designation will be removed. While the sheriff says reassuringly, we are committed to your success. Well, some see some much more sinister motives, the message basically being we are watching you, and minority groups in particular who are already over-policed and over-prosecuted. To them, this sounds like harassment at best and perhaps just flat-out good old-fashioned racism. Well, for more, we're joined first this week by Ari Bargill. He's a lawyer representing some of the Floridians who've been put on this program and sent those letters. Mr. Bargill, welcome to Planet America.
Good to be here.
So, Ari, can you tell us about your clients? Who are these people that are receiving these letters, and what sort of impact is it having on them?
So, this is a program that's been around for a little while now. The letters are new, but the program isn't. And what the letters are informing people for the first time is that they've been involuntarily enrolled in what it is referred to by the Pasco County Sheriff's Office as an intelligence-led policing program. And that's sort of police speak for a program in which people are watched and harassed by the Pasco County Sheriff's Office, in most instances because of the expectation that they'll commit future crimes. That's constitutionally problematic, and that's why people were reaching out to the Institute for Justice and why we're taking on the Pasco County Sheriff's Office in this case.
Ari, what's the worst example of harassment that you've heard of by the police of someone who's in this program?
Well, unfortunately, it's hard to select what the worst story is, but what I can tell you is that in many instances, and there does seem to be a lot of commonality amongst these occurrences, you'll have police rolling up to houses 7, 8, 9 cars at a time, a dozen or more officers out in front of a house demanding to speak to a child and harassing parents and other brothers and sisters and residents inside the home. If the child isn't home, they impose code enforcement violations for petty things like tall grass or missing house numbers if they believe that people aren't cooperating or are hiding information from the police. And in many instances, they won't take no for an answer. Now, under the U.S. Constitution, if the police come to your house without a warrant and you ask them to leave, they're supposed to leave. But that doesn't happen in Pasco County. Instead, the police will stay, sometimes banging on doors, walking around houses, rapping on windows, and pointing flashlights inside while people cower inside, afraid of the police. And that's not an isolated incident. This has happened to several of our clients, and it's part of a broader problem of harassment that exists under the program. And again, that's why we're challenging it.
And are we typically talking about young people who've maybe committed a number of minor offences, but there could be valid concerns that they could grow up and commit more serious crimes in the future?
Well, part of the problem with the program is that it's so shrouded in secrecy. No one's exactly sure what lands you on this list or how you end up on the radar of the Pasco County Sheriff's Office. They insist that what they're doing is proactive and that they're just, looking for people who they think are going to commit future crimes. But this is more of a dystopian plot line and not a constitutionally legitimate way to keep a community safe. In every instance that we're aware of, people are ending up on these lists without their knowledge and without an ability to get off. And there's really no rhyme or reason that we've been able to discern so far as to how someone gets on it in the first place.
Ari, does this kind of police conduct lead to people, say, lashing out at the police and potentially becoming criminals?
Well, it's really hard to say what it leads to. I think we know for sure that it doesn't actually prevent criminality or accomplish many of the things that it supposedly sets out to do. And we know that by looking at the data from other neighborhoods and other towns. Pasco County is not safer than any other place that surrounds it. It doesn't have lower crime statistics, and it doesn't experience less, drug sales or gang violence or any of these other things that police are typically concerned with. So, we know that it doesn't accomplish what it sets out to do. I think what it definitely does do, and this goes to your question, is it erodes confidence between the citizenry and police. And it makes people very skeptical of police. And if all of your interactions and all of the interactions of those in your community with police are instances where people are being harassed and having their constitutional rights abused, then certainly you're going to be less likely to seek out police in the future if you're in trouble. And you know, given some of the consequences of these actions, whether you end up in jail or in juvenile hall, you're going to miss school, you're going to miss work. Those things do contribute to factors that do ultimately sometimes lead people to end up on the wrong side of the law.
Ari Bargel, good to talk to you. Thanks for being with us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Now to Lauren Johnson, who's with the National Association for the Advancement of Coloured Persons, the NAACP's Legal Defence Fund. Ms. Johnson, welcome to Planet America.
Thank you for having me.
Lauren, probably in anticipation of the inevitable claims of racial profiling, the police in their letter are saying that this is based on unbiased, evidence-based risk assessment. Do you know what that risk assessment is, and do you agree with that?
With regard to the sheriff's characterization or the sheriff's office characterization of this program as unbiased and evidence-based, it's certainly not something that we don't have a lot of information as to what's going into this algorithm or this crude Excel sheet, whatever it may be, that is fueling this program and similar programs like it. But it's not the first time that we have heard law enforcement describe predictive policing tools as objective, as a way to try to frame them as being without bias or evidence-based. Predictive policing is all based on this idea of using algorithms without the human person to predict where crime will happen and who will commit it. And what we've seen is that relying on these kind of tools is relying on data that is very limited and internally flawed. It's based on biased information from the very beginning. And so it's not a program or a policing tool that can just be unbiased and evidence-based. And certainly we haven't seen anything to show what the sheriff's office is basing that distinction on. But we know that relying on historical data like arrest history is relying on data that reinforces and amplifies existing bias in the policing systems as they already stand. And we know that these tools often just exacerbate bias against communities of color, against communities that are already over-policed.
If the police compiled a so-called likely to offend list, but then used it for carrots rather than sticks, that they gave out support rather than harassment, how would you feel about that?
I think honestly that there are mechanisms within the community, people who are best suited to provide services that are and have skill sets that are very separate and apart from the skill sets that law enforcement had. And so I think that it's best to make sure that the experts and people who are best at addressing those community issues and community members' issues are the ones that are doing that, rather than there being a connection of criminality to receiving resources. And it's not the case that people need to be targeted as criminals in order to receive help.
Lauren, this program there in Florida is gaining a lot of national and international attention this week. But to your knowledge, are there programs similar to this being conducted elsewhere?
We have, for a long time, been hearing about and seeing predictive policing programs that sound like the one that we're hearing about in Pasco and also are different in other ways. What's unique and especially concerning about the Pasco Sheriff's Office is what we're learning about kind of the number of predictive policing programs, and that it's not just necessarily this prolific offender program, but that there's also a focus on school children. And what we had learned from the Tampa Bay Times reporting was that there's also a predictive policing program that may be looking at youth and targeting them for heightened law enforcement attention just based on factors beyond their control, like the households they come from or school absences. And so the scope of this program and kind of how engaged it seems to be with the school district has been a special concern here. But we've heard about predictive policing programs and heard about the racial profiling impact of them in other places like Chicago, New York, Los Angeles. Those are places that had very public exposure of predictive policing programs that received scrutiny and have received criticism, and in some places stopped certain programs. And with regard to Florida specifically, we don't know yet, and we are continuing to try to investigate about the scope of these kind of programs, especially where they may also involve sharing of student data with law enforcement for predictive policing purposes. The sheriff in this case in Pasco has referenced other jurisdictions, but we have not yet confirmed what those policing practices look like.
Lauren Johnson, many thanks indeed for being with us on Planet America.
Thank you so much.
Former President Donald Trump remains the most popular potential Republican Party nominee for president in 2024, and that is historically unusual. Typically, defeated presidents do not try and stage a comeback. In fact, in history, only one has ever succeeded, and like Trump, he had to overcome some major scandals, including allegations of rape, to be elected in the first place. This is the story of President Grover Cleveland. Grover Cleveland has a number of claims to fame and infamy. He is the only president to be elected to 2 non-consecutive terms. He is both the 22nd and 24th president of the United States. He was the only bachelor president to marry in the White House, and as previously noted in this segment, Grover was his middle name. His first name was Stephen Cleveland. But Cleveland's private affairs very nearly derailed his first election altogether. A reform-minded Democratic governor of New York and a former mayor of Buffalo, Grover Cleveland, known as Grover the Good to his supporters, easily won his party's nomination for president in July of 1884, back in the days when party bosses rather than primary voters picked the candidates. Less than 2 weeks later, though, on July 21st, a potentially devastating story appeared in the Buffalo Evening Telegraph. It reported that a decade earlier, a 38-year-old widow, Maria Halpin, had given birth to a son she named Oscar Folsom Cleveland, and that the boy was given up for adoption after she was sent to an insane asylum. Similar rumours had been raised in Cleveland's earlier political campaigns, and this time his staff didn't even bother to deny that he and Halpin had previously been what they described as
illicitly acquainted.
But then came the spin. His staff told reporters that Cleveland, and indeed quite a number of other Buffalo businessmen, had enjoyed the affections of Mrs. Halpin, insinuating that she was essentially a sex worker, and that after she became pregnant, Cleveland, as the only bachelor among them, did the honourable thing and claimed to be the boy's father, gave him his name, and once Halpin's alcoholism became apparent, helped him to find a suitable family for adoption. And for a while, it looked as though the scandal might just fade away. Cleveland's rival for the presidency, Senator James Blaine, was already damaged political goods. He'd won the nomination of a deeply divided Republican Party, despite having been caught some years before trading political favours for cash. Blaine hobnobbed with the wealthy elite, while Cleveland identified with the working and middle classes. Still, Blaine's supporters taunted Cleveland during rallies and speeches with the chant, "Ma, Ma, where's my pa?" but to little effect. Then, 4 days before the November 4th election, another political bombshell. A reporter from the Chicago Tribune tracked down Mrs. Halpin and got her side of the story, and it was shocking. She said, "The circumstances under which my ruin was accomplished are too revolting on the part of Grover Cleveland to be made public." The paper also unearthed an 1874 affidavit where
Halpin strongly implied that Cleveland's entry into her room and the incident that transpired there was not consensual. He was forceful and violent, she alleged, and later promised to ruin her if she went to the authorities.
The Tribune quoted William King, the doctor at the asylum where Maria Halpin was admitted, as saying,
"She was brought to the asylum without warrant or form of law."
and that Dr. King
found that she was not insane, though she had been drinking. The managers of the asylum had no right to detain her.
By the time Mrs. Halpin was released, her baby son had been taken away. Now, 10 years later, days before the election, she accused presidential candidate Grover Cleveland of rape and abduction, which he denied. Her lawyers announced they wanted Cleveland charged. But then came another twist. Maria Halpin's brother-in-law produced an agreement which showed she had been paid $500 to surrender her son and make no further demands of any kind on the father. The agreement did not say who that father was, but her lawyers claimed the agreement was in Grover Cleveland's handwriting. Suddenly, to many, Halpin looked like a fallen woman and a gold digger who'd already been compensated and now wanted to extort more money from an essentially decent man running for the presidency. Then came another twist. It turned out Oscar Folsom Cleveland had been adopted by Dr. William King, who declared Maria Halpin to be sane. That November's election was incredibly close, but in the end, Grover Cleveland won his home state of New York over Senator James Blaine by just over 1,000 votes, and with it, the Electoral College and the presidency. Democrats now gleefully answered the taunt of "Ma, ma, where's my pa?" with a rejoinder, "He's gone to the White House, ha ha ha." Once in the White House, President Cleveland announced that he was finally getting married to a woman 27 years his junior, Frances, the 21-year-old daughter of Cleveland's best friend, a businessman named, wait for it, Oscar Folsom. So, was Grover Cleveland the father of 10-year-old Oscar Folsom Cleveland, or was his buddy Oscar Folsom the father? Maybe. Nobody really knows, and voters really didn't care. As for Maria Halpin, she never got her son back. She remarried and lived out the rest of her life in relative obscurity. It's less clear what became of young Oscar, though. Some historians think that he changed his name to James King and became a doctor, just like his adoptive father. Yeah, it's just time for a relatively brief fireside chat this week, Chairs. We did say we'd circle back to the situation facing Andrew Cuomo, the Democratic governor of New York, three-term governor, running for a fourth term next year, he says. He's also the son of a three-term governor. He's very, very focused on legacy, how history is going to record him. He's previously said he would only leave the governorship early if God willed it, basically if he died. But right now he's got the President of the United States, the head of his party, Joe Biden, saying he has to resign. Surely he has to resign.
See, the sad thing is I don't think he necessarily does have to resign. We're living in an era of shamelessness where, look at Virginia. Virginia have the governor, the deputy governor, the attorney general, all three of them were in the middle of scandals, a year and a half ago. One was accused of rape, multiple rape. One was has blackface allegations. They're still there. And everyone's forgotten about them now.
But in a way, though, that was such a rare situation because the governor, who was, historic photos of him wearing blackface from years ago, he would have had to resign, except his lieutenant governor, who would have replaced him, was the one accused of rape. Yeah. And then the attorney general was accused of all sorts of wrongdoing as well. So the three of them said, let's not say anything and we might get away with it. And they kind of have. But Andrew Cuomo he's touching up his security detail, staffers, he's kissing them on the lips, he's doing all this kind of thing which, he's trying to run the Trump defence here. It's just locker room talk, I'm Italian, all that kind of thing.
What he needs to be is impeached. Like someone needs to teach these politicians that if they try and grit it out and try and shameless it out, they're going to get done. Yeah. Like just once, someone needs to get done as a lesson to the future people.
I mean, the numbers are there. The impeachment in Albany, the New York capital, is essentially the same as the impeachment that we've seen a couple of times in Washington with Trump. You just need a majority in the lower house. You need a 2/3 majority in the upper house. Right now, those numbers are there, and the pressure has not really started to even build after that report this week. So surely, if Andrew Cuomo, with an eye to what being impeached and removed from office, I mean, Richard Nixon resigned when he knew he was going to be impeached. Yep. If you know you are going to be convicted and removed, there's no way out of this. It's not like Trump who can just say, oh yeah, the Republicans will stick by me.
If they begin the process, they actually begin the process of impeachment, maybe he'll step down then, because he doesn't have the numbers. But I just think he's going to grit it out until he absolutely has to go. Because people haven't been punished for Me Too offences for a long time now. When it first started, Al Franken, he resigned, and it looked like that they were going to take some scalps. But in the last few years, people have just been just sticking it out.
But this is not just.
And if he doesn't resign, no one will resign because he's incredibly
Which is why he
unpopular.
has to resign.
Well,
because this is a workplace
so.
culture issue, and it's not just about intimidation and intimacy overlapping in this bizarre kind of cult of Andrew that's been running out of the governor's office for several years, where he was using both intimacy and intimidation to kind of coerce people, and these women were feeling as though I couldn't say anything because I'm going to lose my job, etc. I mean, this is the kind of thing. He's got you showed us the poll, 11% approval right now. He's up for re-election next year. What is the point of him hanging on at all?
If he's a Democrat, he'll win if he gets through the primary. That's what's worth hanging on.
But he can't win a primary with 11% support.
I hope you're right, because let's not forget there are thousands of old people dead because of his policy with COVID in the nursing homes.
Right.
Let's not forget the fact that he's got all kinds of conflict of interest issues as well, running a toxic workplace, misappropriating his staff to write his book for him. He's got so many scandals. He's got thousands of scandals coming out of his ears.
Well, it'll be a miracle.
He's got to go.
Right, so it'll be a miracle if he survives, and probably a very good thing if he doesn't. We'll wait and see. But that is all the time we have for another trip to Planet America. We'll see you back here at the same time next week, or on ABC iView, Facebook and YouTube, whenever suits you.
And if that's not enough, I'm going to try to have another pet podcast for you later on tonight in all the usual pod places there. I'll try.
Bye-bye.